Hey everyone, it's Ivan, KitBadger.com, out here to bring you another gear review, and today I'm talking optics. This guy right here, which is the Atibal X 1:10 first focal plane scope. Been using this Atibal X for a number of months on a number of host weapons, and it's pretty cool. It is a 1:10, so on the low end we actually have 1X, crank this guy up, and you have 10X. That alone is pretty awesome depending on your use case. On the one hand, it allows you to identify targets further out, especially compared to a 1:4, 1:6, even a 1:8. And on top of that, it actually extends the capability, potentially, of whatever weapon system you're on. Most rifles nowadays, especially depending on caliber, they can reach out pretty far. And a limitation often is whatever optic. So if you have a red dot, granted, you can make them work, you can definitely stretch them out, but you can get even more out of it, arguably easier, with a magnified optic, especially something with different drops or depending on the reticle, how it's set up. And this absolutely, I think, does a pretty good job in extending capabilities of rifles. More so, obviously, than a 1:4 or 1:6. And I also appreciate Atibal actually moving the market. Rather than coming out with one more 1:6, they said, hey, we're gonna come out with 1:10. And they were kind of the first ones to market and definitely pushed people to come out with 1:10s. Let's talk some of the unique things about this Atibal X. First of all, 30mm objective lens. It's nice, lets in a lot of light. I will say the tube, it's 35mm. Not a huge fan just because it's not as supported as like 34mm tubes, but you can obviously find rings and mounts out there, this one being a Bobro mount. As far as the adjustments, they're in 1/10 of a mil increments. You just pull the caps out, make your adjustments. Pretty distinct clicks, which is a good thing. Over on the left side, we actually can adjust our illumination, and the adjustments have an off in between each setting, and they go from 0 up to 6. So if you were on 0, I was in between 1 and 2. If you're on 0, you can go to 1 if you just need a little bit of illumination, or you can go the other direction and get to 6, off in between. Is it daylight bright? You can see it during the day. Does it turn into a fireball like a red dot or like some of the Vortex? It does not. So on 1X, if you turn this thing up to 6, yeah, like it's bright, you can see it, but is it a like red dot? Not really. And I'll show you the reticle right now, actually. We'll jump straight into that. Here's our reticle. On 1X, we're looking at a IPSC target at 50 yards. Here's that same IPSC target out at 100 yards. And here we are at 10X. Here is max illumination. With respect to the illumination and the reticle, what are my thoughts? As far as the illumination goes, I think it lends itself much more to being in low light. Maybe the sun just set, you need to illuminate your reticle. Does a good job there. As far as being on 1 power, turning this all the way up, which is 6, and using it like a red dot, in my experience, it doesn't lend itself to that very much. In part, it just doesn't get as bright as I would like, and the way the reticle is illuminated, it also illuminates your 20 mil diamond, which doesn't really do much for me. And I would rather personally just have the center dot illuminated and have it illuminated very bright, so I could just use it like a red dot on 1X. And going into that reticle, again, 20 mil diamond. In my experience, that's not something I use for milling or ranging, anything like that. And when you crank it up to 10, it kind of obscures things. It's relatively big looking through this. The other thing that I do like / don't like is, no, I do like it. The very center dot is a 1/4 mil. So when you crank it up to 10, again, this being first focal plane, as you adjust it and increase the magnification, the entire reticle gets bigger, which is good because when you get up to 10x, that 1/4 mil center dot, you can actually use, and it doesn't obscure a bunch of your target, as opposed to having something bigger and arguably easier to see at 1x. And then when you crank it up, now it's obscuring your target, really hard to refine that point of aim. And in fairness to Atibal, or honestly any manufacturer for that matter, creating a good usable reticle for a first focal plane is difficult, because having something that's usable on low power and then crank it up and not have it like obscure your target or anything along those lines can make it really difficult. I will say, depending on how you use this, can absolutely do wonders. Like if you learn your drops, everything like that, you can mill inside this. It is great. On 1X, definitely not my favorite. And as I mentioned, on 10X, personally, I find that diamond to be kind of distracting. However, I use this Atibal X. As I mentioned, I've shot on a number of different host weapons to include this Sugar Weasel by Q, prototype 5.56, taking it out to a number of different distances, and it's done good for me.
500.
500? 3.5 hold?
Yes.
The most time I've actually put in with this optic was on a ADM, is that right? American Defense Manufacturing, their AR-10, and I had it mounted on there and took it down and competed with it down in Arizona at Desert Brutality 2020. Did a great job for me on that gun, and largely on that gun in general, just with respect to capability. 308 out of a 16-inch gas gun, it'll do a lot, but depending on what kind of optic you have, might limit your ability behind that gun. And having 1 to 10 definitely opened up possibilities for what that gun was capable of. During the competition, depending on the distances of the course, I would usually keep it somewhere right around about 2.5. Kind of sweet spot with respect to the course that I was shooting, in that it was enough magnification to where it could help me refine my sight picture, but not so much that when I shoulder it, I'm like searching for my target out there, because it just shrunk down the field of view. And in it, definitely got abused a little bit. Still has a pretty nice ding up here. Didn't lose zero or anything like that. Again, on the clock, threw this thing up on top of Connex box, finished out my course fire. But no, this thing's been pretty bomb-proof in my experience. And with respect to being bomb-proof, if you happen to bust one of these, Atibal has their lifetime warranty, which is pretty rad. So what are my overall thoughts on Atibal X? First and foremost, I think it's awesome that Atibal moved the market, pushed it to a 1 to 10. People have been coming out with 1 to 4s, and look, 1 to 6, oh, we made a 1 to 8, and they're like, oh, here's a 1 to 10. And that ability, or capability rather, is pretty significant. Being able to go from 1 all the way up to 10 definitely can increase your capability, depending on your weapon system caliber, not to mention, depending on use case, actually being able to target ID out to further distances. and at the same time maintain usability up close when you crank that back down to 1. I think that's really cool. Also, you're probably not going to find anything as capable and feature rich at the price point. These go for about 850 bucks, right in there. First focal plane, 1 to 10. It's pretty significant. So, is this the right optic for you? A lot of people ask me, hey, should I get this optic, whatever it may be. Here's my canned response. What are you going to be using it for? And more importantly, well, arguably more importantly, is what reticle do you like? So if you are going to be using something and you're like, hey, I want this super ninja gun, I want capable of doing anything, but your paradigm is you shoot it at indoor range at 25 yards, I don't know, you may or may not need 10 power. Or, as I mentioned to the reticle, if something does all these amazing things, but the way the reticle is set up, it doesn't really lend itself to the way you shoot, might not be the best thing for you. So to that end, do you need the capability of a 1 to 10, which is pretty rad, and does this reticle work for you? If it's yes and yes, pretty hard to beat for about 850 bucks. But if you pick one up and have some use with it, let me know how it's done for you. And as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.